Thank you very much for everybody for joining the first LOOR webinar series for 2021, which is the Stability Screening Alphabet Soup by Richard Hinterhoeller of the Sail Canada Offshore Group. Just a couple of key items. This session is being recorded and it will be posted publicly on the internet. So your continued participation provides your approval for this. Thank you very much for doing that. Just a couple of ground rules. All the attendees will be muted during the session unless unmuted to ask a question. We would like to leave all the questions to the end. All the slides are numbered, so if you have a question on a particular slide, please give us that number when you're asking the question. The process we'll be using for asking questions is to raise your virtual Zoom hand. We'll show you that in a minute. Will be recognized in turn that you raised your hand. We'll get you unmuted and then you can ask your question. Would appreciate a single question at a time so everybody will have a chance. And we won't be focusing on specific boats except as examples, as this is about the general concept of stability. This is how you raise your virtual Zoom hand. You can click on participants. You'll find a little button that says raise hand. Will then be flagged in the participants list that you've raised your hand, and it'll be in order that you did that, and we'll process you in order. We'll call on you to unmute, and so you can ask your question or make your comment. Please mute yourself when you're finished. This is why we found this works very well on these online meetings to make it orderly. So we appreciate everybody following that. LOOR is the Lakeshore Offshore Racing Group. It's a component of the Port Credit Yacht Club. We hold the Susan Hood Trophy Race, the Lake Ontario 300 Challenge Race, and every 2 years, people want to go around Lake Ontario twice. And the part of the Lake Ontario 300 for solo racers is part of the Great Lakes Single-Handed Society's Challenge Race. If you want more information on LOOR, they're up on the slide. We have 2 more webinars that are coming up. One is on the recommended sail inventory for Lake Ontario offshore racing. And the other one is, if you're a new boat owner, how do I get a certificate in PERF to be able to participate? For more information or to register, just go to www.loor.ca and click on the blog entry, and that'll give you more information and allow you to register. Here's some information on the Offshore Racing Group from Sail Canada. It provides the courses that you need for participating in many offshore racing. It has representatives on the World Sailing Offshore Committees, of which Richard is one of the representatives. And if you want to contact them, you can email them at offshore@sailing.ca. Here's a brief information about Richard. You may recognize his name and associated with sharks, and he's been working on many offshore races and had to deal with the problems of stability. So I'd like to turn it over to Richard. I'll stop sharing so he can start sharing.
Great, thank you. Just give me a minute to remember what I'm doing here and share. Did I get the right one? I got the right one. Excellent.
Yes, you
okay.
did.
Great, Graham and LOOR, thank you very much for hosting this, and for all of you attendees, thank you very much for joining us this evening. For LOOR, the severest race is offshore category 3. So what I've done in this slide deck is geared the numbers toward offshore category 3. So just quickly, how I got into this. In September 2006, I became co-race director for the Marblehead to Halifax Ocean Race. We have the committees are in parallel, one at the Boston Yacht Club, one at the Royal Nova Scotia Yacht Squadron. I'm at the squadron end, of course. Well, within a week of me joining the committee, we had an email from somebody asking whether his boat met the stability requirements for the race. Well, so here we are. Marblehead was entering its 104th year of running. And for all I knew, my Boston counterpart had been with the race all that time and knew his stuff about the stability screening since he'd written the notice of race. So as the new guy, I wanted to impress them in a positive way. And of course, I looked at the notice of race, and the that led me to the offshore special regulations, and there I saw all of these acronyms, and I said, oh my goodness, what have I got myself into? But anyway, I did my research and found an answer.
Joined the meeting.
And welcome. And anyway, I was half right about my counterpart. Jeff Smith would have been around 78 at the time and had devoted many years to the race, and continued to do so for many years. But nobody on the committee understood stability screening. My well-researched reply prompted Jeff to ask, do you understand that alphabet soup? So in honor of my late friend and mentor, I've named this presentation after his inimitable quip. So we'll start with an introduction in which I'll quickly review the methods that are in there in the regulations, show you where to find the numbers for boats, and then I will come back in part 2 and go through the details and explain what is behind all of these numbers, and that's where I get to nerd things up rather nicely. And then, as Graham said, we'll continue with questions. So what is the purpose of the special regulation? Capsize avoidance is the first, and survivability if you can't avoid the capsize. So special regulation 3.04 is divided into 2 parts. Point 1 and point 2. Point 1 stands alone. It is the primary one. This is the gospel. If you've got this, then you're golden. And so it's able to demonstrate compliance with ISO 12217-2 with either the CE mark or the designer's declaration. The recreational, I don't know why they have it in here. Recreational craft directive is basically the law that requires builders, if they want to sell in Europe, that they have to comply with this standard. In North America, when somebody comes up with ISO, it's the sky is falling in, the sky is falling in. What is this thing? It's actually really simple for us to administer and for boat owners to test. The boats come with a capacity sticker, and now, Graham, I'm seeing people covering up part of my screen. Is everybody seeing that? Like the participants?
Yeah, you can. Everybody's seeing this. Yeah.
Okay.
It's just you just have the way.
So part. Okay, so part of my screen is so you're losing part of my PowerPoint. Oh, anyway, that's safe.
No.
We can see everything. It's fine.
It's fine. Okay, thank you. So maybe I can. There you go. So what you'll see here is this is the important thing here. CE, the CE mark means that you have passed the certificate. The boat has passed the certification. You may not have. A boat is permitted to be certified for more than one category. So this is a good example. Category A, which corresponds to offshore categories 0, 1, and 2. A maximum capacity of 8 people. For category 3, that's the LOOR races, 9 people, and C and D, 10 people. There is no offshore equivalent, offshore special regulations equipment for C and D. They don't use it, but it's still good guidance to the owner that that's the maximum capacity for your boat. So now we get to the second part, 3.04.2, which offers 3 alternatives to that to that capacity sticker. And the first one, it mentions sticks, AVS, minimum riding energy. These are really the components of the ISO standard, the stability standard. And what they've done is they've broken it out for the benefit of people who may not be so familiar with it. The difference between this and the other one, they're really the same. The difference is that to get be certified, the design has to go through a process. It has to go through a notified body and be approved and that sort of thing. Whereas in this case, the designer could, you know, I mean, let's say that I was designing the Richards rocket ship 10-meter, and I have no intention of sailing it in Europe, but I want to demonstrate that it is a seaworthy boat. I could do these calculations and sign a designer's declaration saying that this boat meets all of the requirements of ISO 12217, but without going through the certification process. If you look at the Sail Canada prescriptions, you'll see that we also have this in here. It's a precursor to this minimum writing energy, and I will explain reasoning for that in part 2. If you can't make alternative 1, alternative 2 is available to you, and that is the stability index in the ORC rating system of not less than 103. Ideally, that comes from, well, either way, it's going to come from an ORC certificate. The international, which is what the I indicates, has the advantage that the boat has been measured. So they've done in the water measurements to determine the displacement of the boat and inclination tests to determine the vertical center of gravity so that they can accurately calculate the stability index. In the United States, they're using the offshore racing rule in many places. It uses the same, the two of them are very similar. They have the same roots, as you'll find out later, and they use the same stability criteria. So a fully measured OR certificate is the equivalent to the ORC International. The question that often comes up is, what about sister ship data? Well, it has issues. The
Richard,
first one, yes?
I'm going to just remove the unhost capability so that they won't hear your background noise. So you may have to share your screen again. Just stand by.
Okay.
Go ahead, continue.
Okay, thank you. So has either boat been modified? In my database, I have got J35s as an example, which range from stability index of 102.1 to 128.9. So the boat that has the 102.1 does not meet category 3. The boat at 128.9 is clearly into category 0, which has a minimum of 120. So we've got J35s that qualify for 5 offshore categories, all the same model of boat. So do you know which one you are, whether this boat that is asking for sister ship data is the one that doesn't qualify for your race? And the second one is philosophical. Is it fair to have one owner pay for a certificate so that another one gets a free entry into a race? And similarly for the rating authorities. And then there is the third and final alternative, which is the IRC SSS base value of not less than 15. It's published on an IRC certificate. If you have an IRC certificate, Sail Canada has a public domain copy of the equations, and so we can produce a SSS value for any boat if you can provide a perf certificate. And we provide a listing for any race organizer who requests it. So here's a recapitulation of part 1. The primary system is ISO from the capacity plate or the owner's manual. And then the secondary, we've got the 3 alternatives. The STIX one is basically the same as the ISO, except it's a declaration by the yacht designer. ORC stability index from an ORC certificate, and SSS from an IRC certificate or Sail Canada. So anybody can get a certification. It's not difficult. Now, as for the alphabet soup behind all of this, To understand why we have those 3 or 4, depending on how you define it, systems, you want to understand the history, and then of course the acronyms will follow through as we go through it. It was believed at one time that boats capsize due to wind. They still do. Dinghies and multi-hulls could capsize, but keel boats couldn't because they had ballast. And then, of course, the infamous 1979 Fastnet race, where 75 keel boats were capsized and some of them remained turtles. Clearly, the assumption was wrong. Since this happened on the Royal Yachting Association's patch, they undertook some wave tests conducted at the Wolfson Institute, part of the University of Southampton. Society of Naval and Architects and Marine Engineers conducted a complementary set of tests in the United States. And what they did was they took a series of boats models, scale models, and put them into a wave tank. And here's some pictures of it, of a boat lying broad to a wave, conveniently located right where it decides to break. And in this picture, it's not very clear, but that sticking up there is the keel, and that's the rudder. So the boat is completely capsized. And then here the boat is, they say, return to normal. I'm sure the crew might not be feeling so normal at that point. So what did they determine? A keelboat caught beam to a breaking wave can be capsized. A breaking wave as small as 30% of the hull length will capsize some boats, and no boat will resist capsize if the breaking wave is 60% or greater of the hull length. So in context of Category 3, ISO has the boats designed to meet 4 meter significant wave height, 40 knots of wind. So here you see the range of boat lengths to 30 and 60%, 6.7 to 13 meters. So that's pretty close to a 2-to-1 range in length. For that reason, boat length is no longer used for screening. There's simply too many other factors that influence the seaworthiness of the boat. So of course, RYA wanted to be racing again the next year, and they needed something to screen out boats that weren't seaworthy enough for their races. And it was 1979. IOR was the dominant rating system, and detailed stability information was not published. If the stability calculations had been done, they would be in some designer's drawers locked up in the office. So the RYA used what they could lay their hands on, which was effectively brochure type data, and they combined that with the information they had gleaned from their wave tank studies, and they created the stability, safety, and screening number. There's your triple S. So we've knocked off our first acronym if you're keeping track. And it starts with length, and then they multiply it by a number of other factors. So excess beam gets penalized, a large sail plan gets penalized, light displacement gets penalized. And for boats of that vintage, it actually works pretty well. So here we've got the J24 1977 design. So whereas the hull shape was not influenced by IOR was falling out of favor in some regards, other aspects of it did. This was the type of keel shape that the IOR boats, and the center of gravity of the lead ballast would have been somewhere up here. I hope everybody can see my cursor, but just under the canoe body hull. So SSS equals 9, which is not enough to meet the 13 for 15, sorry, for Category 3, and no other screening permits it either. And here we have some empirical evidence that suggests that SSS is correct. But time does not stand still for anybody, and SSS does not handle a boat like this very well. The J80 has got a big delta down here at the bottom of a deep keel, and the center of gravity is way down here below it. SSS, because of the limited information that was available at the time, has no input for this type of information. Now, when I say that, IRC may have tweaked it since they went public with the copy we have, so they may have something that accommodates for that, but the version we have certainly doesn't. So under SSS, the J80 would not meet category 3, but under ISO, certainly the designer's declaration, it does meet category 3. For the rest of it, the two I'm going to call them measured, call the SSS as an empirical screening system. The other ones are measured. And stability is a key metric for the other two, for ISO and for ORC. So what I've done here is I've illustrated an experiment that most yacht clubs would be able to do if they so wished. If you take a laser or similar dinghy, what I mean by similar is any dinghy which capsize and rewrite, and you don't have to bail any water out of it. So that counts out a few boats. And what we've done is we've attached a bow line to the dock and a stern line to the dock, so that if you capsize this boat and turn it turtle and return it upright, the rope isn't snagging and interfering with the stability of the boat. And we have a cord, a nice light cord that we're going to attach somewhere up on the mast. And as in this experiment, we will pull on the cord to heel the dinghy to some angle of heel. And we'll measure the tension in that cord. And if you do that for a few angles, you'll see that, well, at 0, you don't need any tension to keep the boat upright. The boat is not seeing anything, so it doesn't have any righting moment, and you're not exerting a heeling moment. As you pull a little bit, you bring it over to 10 degrees, there's certain force required. At 20 degrees, about twice as much. But you can see at the 30 degrees that it's starting to drop off a little bit, diminishes. It reaches its peak somewhere in a dinghy, somewhere around the 40-45 degree range, and then the tension is just going to become less and less tension to heel the boat farther until you get to this angle right here. I'm just calling it a capsize angle to stay away from the other angles. And this is kind of a neat one. If you took that dinghy and took it just a degree beyond that capsize angle and rested the tip of the mast in your hand, there'd be hardly any force on your hand at all. If you raised your hand a few centimeters and brought the boat back below that angle, the boat would rewrite itself. If, on the other hand, you just you took your hand away, then the boat would continue through and end up at 180 degrees. So what you've got is we had no righting moment there, no righting moment there, no righting moment there. 3 spots with no righting moment and no effort required to keep the boat there. This curve applies to most sailboats, keelboats, multi-hulls, you name it. So that was if there's any naval architects watching, they're going to sit there and say that's a horribly incorrect experiment, and it's not intended to be correct. It's just to illustrate the concept. So what I've done here is shown you what naval architects do and what the ORC and the ISO stability programs are looking at. And if anybody says, hey, that looks like a shark, that's what it is, because I have access to these plans and I'm not going to run into any copyright infringement issues with it. And we have a very accurate stability, like inclination test done on the boat. So the boat has a mast. The mast has a center. It's known as the center of gravity. Everything has a center of gravity. This is where it is for the shark. And it is always being pulled straight toward the center of the earth by the force of gravity. That's why it has the G on it. B is buoyancy. And as you can see, with the boat heeled over here, the windward side has come out of the water, and so is no longer offering any buoyancy. But on the leeward side, more of the hull has become immersed, and so you can just visually see that the center of buoyancy is somewhere over here, and this is precisely where it is. The distance between the two is Z, and it is referred to as the GZ arm. We're getting close to another acronym with that. And this is at 30 degrees. So here we show, the shark at various angles of heel to kind of give you a sense of what we're doing here. The blue line you're familiar with, that's from our laser experiment. The green line would be a very, very stable boat. We're approaching 12-meter type stability. When I said it applies to most boats, moth dinghies are notorious for capsizing at the dock. So all they have is this bottom part here, and none of this upside, and 12 meters are the other way around. I have a 12-meter on file with an angle of vanishing stability of 180 degrees. So this represents the extremely stable boats, and your keel boats, the type that will be racing in Lake Ontario 300, tend to fall into this kind of a range. And multi-hulls follow this type of a thing, of a curve. The important point, I chose these very carefully. Notice how the initial stability on these boats is identical. I mean, they don't start to, you can start to discern the difference out somewhere around 20 degrees. What I'm indicating here is that if you step on the gunnel of a boat and heel it over 5 degrees, it gives you no indication whatsoever of whether this is the capsize angle, or this is the capsize angle, or this is the capsize angle. So let's take that dinghy curve, the 90-degree capsize angle, and this area here is the energy that is required to capsize the boat, to bring it to that angle there. So if you have a small wave hitting the boat, left of this line, the energy is left of the, is equivalent to that area left of this line, then that's not enough to capsize the boat. If it's this area left of this line, not enough to capsize the boat, and so on and so forth until you get somewhere out here, and then it's enough to capsize the boat. The green area for this boat is the energy required to bring the boat right side up again. So in this idealized curve with the 90-degree capsize angle, the red and the green areas are identical. It would take a wave of identical energy to bring the boat back right side up. So if your boat has been exposed beam to waves for an hour, and finally one rogue wave comes along and it has just enough energy to flip the boat, statistically speaking, you're going to be waiting an hour before you'll have another wave come along to bring the boat back to the way the designer had intended it. The red area is AGZ, so it's the area of the GZ curve. The GZ curve, we plotted up the x-axis here, and the heel angle is over here. So AGZ is going to be measured in meters, degrees. If you now add the mass of the boat, so we had the shark earlier, it's about 1,100 kilograms. 1,100 kilograms times that area is going to be your M times AGZ in kilogram meters degrees. That's in your offshore special regulations, 3.42 A3. And here's another one of our acronyms, and I think that is the longest one I have to explain. The rest are a little bit quicker. So if we take that really stable sailboat, you can see the ratio of red is much bigger. The red to green is much bigger. I mean, this red area is about 300 times the size of the green area. So if you have a rogue wave come along and capsize your boat, it's going to take a ripple over here to bring the boat right side up again. this boat is unlikely to stay overturned for any length of time. And now getting into the more normal stability curve, the area here is about a quarter of that. And again, the chances are that if you've had one wave knock you over, probably the next wave is going to bring you back up, maybe a few waves, but you're going to get the boat back right side up, and that is considered capsize survivability. I mean, the boat is right side up again. You might not be happy about it, but this is a curve that I take with a grain of salt, because it doesn't tell us what the conditions, it doesn't tell us much about the boats, but it's an analysis from the 79 Fastnet race, and it's telling you the inverted time in minutes relative to the angle of vanishing, stability. So you can see that as the boats become more stable, the time spent upside down diminishes to zero at 150. Anything over 150, it says the boat is going to snap roll, come right back up again. So, having gone through a bit of naval architecture on stability screening, we get to the ORC stability index. And again, our history lesson, in the 70s, mid 70s, the Americans, US Sailing had evolved a system called the measurement handicapping system. It was gaining popularity. IOR was losing popularity, and MHS was eventually adopted to replace IOR, and it became known as the International Measurement System. Now, IMS had the full lines plan, like the designer had to submit a lines plan, and if they didn't, they had these wands that would measure it. They'd use some sort of laser measuring device if they did it today. They would do in the water tests to determine an accurate displacement, and an inclination test to determine the vertical center of gravity. IMS did briefly fall out of favor, but not long. It was resurrected very quickly as the ORC in parts of Europe and ORR in parts of USA. So that's the historical route for the ORC stability index. And what they did, because they had the information, they just modified their program to come up with the limit of positive stability, which is their term for the capsize angle. They had no information for the deck, but they did have for the hull. So basically, they do a flat deck calculations, stability curves calculations, and they use the term limit of positive stability, which in turn feeds the ORC stability index, another acronym in our alphabet soup. And it starts with the limit of positive stability. You add the capsize increment to it, and you add a size increment. We'll cover the size increment a little bit further down in the slide deck. The capsize increment accounts for excess topside flare. So I did the calculations for the Shark. It works out to minus 0.6. The Shark is taking a small penalty for being a bit beamy, if you can imagine that, for its weight. The J24, on the other hand, minus 8.2. You're knocking 8.2 degrees off your limit of positive stability. It's a large penalty due to excess flare. And the reason for that is when a boat is knocked over by a wave, if you have a narrow boat, the wave will push the boat sideways, and the boat will slide till the energy of the wave has been dissipated. If you have a lot of flare, the gunnel of the boat digs into the water, the wave keeps on pushing, and the boat trips over its gunnel and gets rolled upside down. So obviously that's penalized. So this obviously is a scientific approach, is obviously much better than the empirical SSS, and that's why the ORC stability index takes precedence over the triple S number. Now, also during that time span, the following decades, The European countries were coming together as the European Economic Community, and what they were trying to do is eliminate non-tariff barriers between the countries. One barrier that we're interested in was the different stability screening methods that the different countries used. The organizing body that does that is International Standards Organization. And of course, the Royal Yachting Association got involved because they had their experience with the Triple S method. The result is ISO 12217 Part 2, and this is the way it's typically written. It applies to sailing boats greater than or equal to 6 meters, and I should mention here less than 24. And it uses the stability index, AVS, and writing energy. Those are the ones that we saw in 304.2A. Yes. So AVS, LPS, they're both conceptually the capsize angle. The difference is that AVS includes any contribution that the cabin would make, minus any issues with flooding of your cockpit, which has to be watertight. So you can see here that the AVS for the Shark improves quite a bit when you include the cabin, as opposed to not including the cabin for the LPS. In fact, it's kind of a fun discovered doing this, that if you turtle a Shark, it is floating entirely on its cabin and very little of the hull is immersed. But the loading is different. The ISO have the crews, so typically in a Shark it would be three people hanging on to the gunnel. So at 90 degrees here, the crew would be bringing that center of gravity up toward the center of buoyancy, reducing the GZ arm, bringing this curve down, and moving AVS in toward LPS. So AVS can be larger than LPS for that reason. It can be smaller than LPS for that reason. The two cannot be reliably interchanged, although they're typically similar. So ISO starts with sticks. Sticks is your base length, which is a blend of your hull length and your waterline length. And you have got 7 of these factors that get multiplied by each other. Take the square root of all of these factors multiplied, the product of those, and multiply it by the base length, and you've got sticks. These first two I can't describe elegantly. The first one is a dynamic stability factor. It's basically determining whether that red area under the curve is suitable for the size of boat. And if it's too small, you get a penalty. And if it's larger than necessary, you get a bit of a bonus. Inversion recovery involves the green area, I guess, and the ability to recover after an inversion. Knockdown recovery factor. This is easier to understand. It's the ability of a boat to spill water out of sails after a knockdown. So if you have a big wave knocking you over 90 degrees and filling your sails with water, the boat that's got the smaller sail plan is going to be able to drain the water off the sails more quickly than a boat with the larger sail plan, otherwise identical boat. And so therefore the larger sail plan is going to take a bit of a penalty. Displacement to length factor accounts for the favorable effect of heavy displacement. Why do they like heavy displacement over light displacement? Well, it's the energy in the waves, and the energy to counter the wave is related to that. I mean, just think about, going outside and tackling, a 5-year-old kid from your neighborhood, and you have enough energy to knock that kid down. Now trying to do the same thing to a professional football player. Professional football player is the heavy displacement boat. He's not going over. Beam displacement factor, that's the same as the capsize increment for the ORC. It's the the highly flared boat digging in and being tripped by the gunnel of the boat during a knockdown situation. Wind moment factor accounts for the risk of down flooding, which is water pouring into your companionway hatch if you get hit by a gust specified by ISO. Down flooding, if there's a risk of down flooding during knockdown. So at the angle of vanishing stability, if there's water pouring into the companionway hatch, you're going to take a penalty for that as well. But they decided that wasn't enough. And they added the minimum angle of vanishing stability. Initially, they added a minimum sailing mass, M, and in 2011, they replaced that with the minimum righting energy, M times AGZ. That's the red area under the stability curves. And provided a boat meets each of these, it will comply with that category. If you fail any one of these, you will not meet the category. Overall, it's a very well thought out system. And it's considered to be the gold standard for stability screening, and that's why it takes the first position in the offshore special regulations. So here's a comparison between ORC and ISO. SSS just doesn't graph very well. All you see is a bunch of dots on here that don't mean much. But I can tell you, comparing SSS to the other two systems, SSS is very conservative. It's very rare that SSS would permit a boat into offshore category 3, and one of the other two systems would say no, disagree with it. On the other hand, what will happen is SSS will say this boat doesn't meet it, whereas the other systems will say, yeah, sure, it meets it without any issues. So what I've done here is I've plotted the ORC is the orange line in here, and basically it's the ORC stability index of 103. The slope here is the size increment. So as the boats get bigger, they have less of a penalty, and here they have more of a penalty. Capsize increment has been assumed to be 0. And we're using average displacement boats here. The displacements came out of a textbook I have, Principles of Yacht Design, tells you, the displacements to use for these different hull lengths. The red is the ISO, and in the OSRs, you've got this formula 130 minus 0.005 times the sailing mass, and that's what that curve looks like there as the boats get smaller at the medium displacement, but at no point are you allowed to go below 95 degrees. So as you can see, from this point back, ISO is quite demanding of smaller boats as compared to ORC, and of course vice versa. If we now bring in the heavy displacement and light displacement boats, this is your heavy displacement boat, this is your heavy displacement ORC, the medium we'd already covered, and this is light displacement ISO, light displacement ORC. One thing that's quite easy to see here is that ORC doesn't really care much about displacement, and that's a pretty small range there, but there is quite a range here when you look at ISO, and that can pose a bit of a dilemma for race organizers. I mean, there's a big area there, a big area there where the two systems don't agree with us. You're not going to find much of a problem on this side here, because anybody who's making a boat with a 10.5 meter waterline length, that's a good sized boat. Those boats are being designed to sail offshore oceanic. They're designed for category 2, and so their stability index is going to be somewhere up in here. I mean, 105 degrees is a laughable stability index for a boat of this size. It's easy to get up into this range. Where we have the issue is at the smaller end. And so this shaded area in here, because the smaller boats, it is harder to get high stability index, especially light boat trying to get up to this line up here. So since I have the shark information, this blue dot here corresponds to the blue line. And we saw the LPS for the boat was 113 degrees. Here it is. And if you work through the numbers, the ORC stability index is 109.1. You know, category 2 is 110. It wouldn't take me much to modify my shark to get it up to pass category 2 under ORC. But without that modification, it still easily meets category 3. Now we talk about sticks, or the ISO method. Sticks for the shark works out to 27.7, which is actually quite impressive for a 24-foot boat. It tells you that it is the seaworthy boat that anybody who's sailed a shark understands it to be. The green square is the angle of vanishing stability of 115. Now remember, when I showed you the graph with no people on board, it was 130. With 3 people on board, it comes down to 115. So the shark does not pass ISO. And if you do the minimum righting moment calculation, it comes out at 40,000, which is too small. We need 57,000. So under ISO, the shark would not pass or meet category 3. And that the dilemma is that if the only information that a race organizer or a boat owner has access to is the ORC, they will believe that the shark meets category 3, when in fact, under the gold standard ISO, it doesn't. So here we bring the minimum M from pre-2011 days into play and say, look, your boat has to meet 1,500 kilograms minimum weight for any system, unless you have got the M-time AGS to prove that you've got the 57,000 units. And by applying that to ORC, to SSS, and you don't have to apply it to ISO, we have now filtered the shark out of ORC, and we have removed that dilemma for the race organizers, provided they use the Sail Canada prescription. We can't eliminate the gray area, but we have reduced it. And you know, is that a problem? Maybe, maybe not. So again, we recap. The primary system is ISO. The secondary, in this case, we apply the prescription minimum M of 1,500 kilograms, and one of the 3 systems in descending order of preference. And I'm ready for questions. You still there, Graham?
Yeah, we have the first question is from Louis. Can you unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Thanks, Richard. This is pretty awesome. Very good understanding of it. If I remember correctly, and I was pulling up some data from IRC certificate, it seems that they do and print both the sticks and the SSS base value, AVS, and so on and so forth. But it also seems much like ORC, the data is presented when you have an endorsed certificate in IRC or an international certificate in ORC, which are boats that are actually measured. Both in IRC, we had unendorsed, which was data supplied. And in ORC Club, it can be sister ship data or data supplied. And going back to the J35 example that you brought, how would you come up with a sticks or stability index for a boat that hasn't been fully measured? Because we're going to have that problem with the Max. You guys are probably going to have the same problem when it comes to Lake Ontario sailing with all of the ORC club certificates. And if you have any suggestions or recommendation on how would you evaluate the stability of these boats that haven't been physically measured for these rules? And one last one, if you have an idea, it seems like we use a 103 number for stability. We've always been trying to figure out where does this 103 number come from. So thanks again for the presentation. This has been extremely interesting and good to see.
Well, thanks, Louis. Yeah, definitely the IRC will, if the IRC have got the sticks and AVS information, they will print that on the certificate. I just wasn't trying to overcomplicate the presentation, but that is a source for that. I mean, if the SSS number clears the boat, then what's on the ORC certificate, you know, is not an issue. But if it really boils down to the organizing authority's comfort level on that. Officially, I can't recommend that you use club or unendorsed IRC or you know, unmeasured ORR. The number 103, I really don't want to be commenting on this, but that was a number that came out of the Chicago Mac when Wingnuts capsized, and they failed the 103, and therefore they had decided that. I think there's also a historical perspective in that ORR would not issue a certificate for a boat that had a stability index less than 103, and so I think that's how they picked up on that number. But beyond that, I'm not sure, and it's I'm not qualified really to answer. Next.
Okay, if there are any other questions, just raise your hand virtually in Zoom. So far, not any questions. Sure, anybody? Louis has another question. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Since nobody's asking a question, I'll go back to an unmeasured boat. I agree with you. I mean, we'd much rather have all of the boats, whenever possible, have an ORC international rating or certificate, I'm saying, or be measured for IRC endorsed or ORR and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, due to costs and time, a lot of times you can't force some of the smaller boats to get those. So they end up getting ORC club. And here's where the dilemma comes is ORC is not going to print a stability index if the boat wasn't measured, which I certainly fine with because they're putting their name to it. But let's look at an ORC club certificates. How would you come up with a stability in it, or there isn't a way to do it?
There really isn't. I mean, like I say, the only alternative is to look at SSS.
Isn't SSS a measurement? Doesn't it require a measurement?
No. SSS predates the whole measurement business. They just the Royal Yachting Association just didn't have that information available. So here they had this wave test data, and what they did was you get together a star panel of intelligent people, yacht designers, experienced offshore racers, and that sort of thing. Take a look at these wave test studies that they had systematically done, and they came up with a screening formula that's similar to the, in ways, if you're familiar with how the CCA rating was done, where you know, you sit there and say, okay, this is the ideal beam, and if you know, as you get bigger, as you get wider, you get a bit of a penalty. As you get smaller, you get a bit of a benefit, and they clip the bottom, they clip the top, so you don't end up with outrageous numbers. Actually, in the core of SSS, they use, there is a simplified angle of vanishing stability calculator, where, you know, you put in your ballast ratio and your displacement and your beam, I forget what else, and it gives you it estimates the angle of vanishing stability.
So is there a table for AVS, and since you mentioned the formulas, are the formulas available for both AVS and SSS?
You can look it up on the internet.
Okay.
Look it up on the internet. If you have heavy weather sailing, I'm pretty sure it's in there. You know, you have to be careful with it. Valiant, the 12 meter comes out
assumptions.
It comes out at 46 degrees. So
that's the trick part of it, because we also make an assumption on data that we're not sure the validity of it, and we quote unquote qualifying the boat to race or not based on that.
Yeah, I would, you know, I have presented the offshore special regulations recommended versions, and you know, it's kind of hard to comment otherwise.
Sorry, didn't mean to get you on the spot on that one.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, you know, I know that you know, for the Marblehead race, yeah, I look at the triple S numbers, and if the boat passes triple S, I mean, you know, like Ticonderoga, I mean, you know, we don't bother asking them for stability information because their triple S is like 70 or 80 or something like that, you know, and we need 28.
Right.
Okay.
And don't forget, most of our boats are, you know, I'm dealing a different group of boats, so.
Yep. No, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks,
Are
Lee.
there any other questions? If you could raise your hand virtually in Zoom. Okay. There aren't any other questions. To give one more call out for any questions.
Is it possible to get copies of this presentation?
Yeah, we're going to be working on that, and we'll send it out, and a link to the recording.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay.
Thanks,
We have a question from Andrew Leslie. Can you unmute yourself? Go ahead.
Hi, just quick question. Wondering where we can find, or if there is a list of boats for Lake Ontario that have already passed the stability index, or where I can go to find that for my boat.
Sail Canada makes that list available to race organizers, but I can check with Sail Canada to see if they're prepared to make it public.
Yeah, that would be very helpful if there's a public list of what boats can and can't do the Category 3 racing on Lake Ontario.
But in that list, we publish the triple S number, or if we can find a capacity plate, then we'll put the ISO certification in. But we're not going to publish ORR or ORC because of the sistership issue.
And the other comment is that it's not a complete list of all the boats in the world. So as new boats come to Lake Ontario, they may or may not be in the list.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions? If not, then I'd like to thank Richard for his presentation. And I apologize that we had some beeping noise that we'll try to figure out how to make sure it doesn't happen for the next webinar that comes up. I'll be sending out an email with the presentation and a link to the recording. And there's a couple of upcoming LOOR webinars, one a month until March. February is the sale inventory, and in March, it's how do you get a purse certificate. And here's more information on how to get stuff about Lake Ontario 300. And again, I would like to thank everybody for joining for this. And thank you again, Richard and Sail Canada. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Graham.
Yep.
And everybody.
Mm-hmm.